What's up, fellow gamers? Phreak here. I'm the design lead of Summoner's Rift Team's live pod, and I'm here to talk to you about patch 14.21 going to the PBE within about 12 to 24 hours of this video going live on my YouTube channel. This is not 14.20, which is going live today or tomorrow. I covered the balance changes of that patch in last week's video. This is about the stuff going to PBE in about a day's time. We'll talk about balance changes when it comes to it, okay, sure, but the big updates in 21 are the update to Swain and an update to both Champion and Objective bounties, which are coming in 14.21. Since that's all hitting PBE, I figured I wanted to talk about that early on in the process. There may be some tweaks in both of these cases here, but I want to talk about why things are going on, and this gives us space then to talk about just the balance changes for 21 when it comes time for that later on, okay? So, let's talk about Swain, why we did work on Swain, and what we're trying to essentially fix. So, Swain has two core problems. Essentially, it's oversimplifying it, but it's a way to simplify it down to one sentence, which is that Swain wins a lot of games in mid lane and bot lane, but he feels really bad to play there. Certainly, mages are not common down in bot lane, and that's fine. He's been one of the higher win rate mages down there for a while. Whatever, we tend to be willing to accept like 53-ish% win rates to bot lane mages because they're just never popular enough to take over the game, and so it's not a pressing issue, and it hurts everyone else who plays the champion, you know, when like 5% of his plays are in bot lane. So we acknowledge that. It's fine, whatever, we deal with it. But the other thing is that Swain's largest audience has moved over to support, but he's not very good there. So the weird juxtaposition is that he's a lot more performant in mid lane and bot lane, despite the fact, despite the fact that he's very performant, he feels really bad to play in those roles. At least mid lane specifically, where usually 53% win rate mid laners are pretty nice and people are happy to play them. Doesn't seem to be the case here for Swain. And then in support, we don't really have room to buff him because 53% is really our limit on acceptable win rates. Unless they're incredibly, incredibly easy, Swain is not really that. And so even though Swain is a pretty weak support by win rate, we don't have room to buff him because he's actually already very performant in mid and bot. And so this is a sort of catch-22 that we can't easily solve, and so you can't just do some balance changes, and so hence we spin up a project and do larger work onto him. So goal 0 is to fix both these problems. That's not very helpful though. Let's do some stuff, right? So goal 1 is to fix the mid/bot satisfaction. Now again, we don't have any win rate budget here, and so it's what trade-offs can we make to have Swain feel better to play without raising win rate, because we're at win rate cap. And if you get to the point where like mid Swain feels great, then he's a popular mid laner, and we can balance him around having a normal win rate, that's still a win, because when we get a satisfying mid laner, it doesn't have to be bribed with a bunch of win rate. And we get a mid laner back, and that's a good thing. The secondary goal, which would also be a good thing, is just to give some strict win rate to Swain support. If we're ceilinged on how much we can buff him, then can we move power around to make support just stronger, keeping mid and bot the same, so that support Swain can just feel good for the players who are playing him, which is the majority of Swain players. And ideally get both of these. But honestly, if we only get one of them, like mid and bot Swain have the same pick rate with the same win rate, okay, darn, that's too bad, but at least we had this large number of support Swain players have a better performing champion. That's pretty good. Or maybe we can't make support Swain really any better, but mid and bot, like mid lane especially, mid lane Swain feels better to play and his player base comes back, because support Swain was only a thing like after the most recent rework, even though the relative win rates comparing mid to support weren't really that different across time. If we get mid lane Swain players back, that's also a win. Great, wonderful stuff, right? So either one is fine, but ideally both. So let's talk about how we get there, what we're trying to do in order to make these goals a reality. So there's some really easy stuff, which is just simply moving base stats. That's primarily bringing down base mana and bringing up mana regen. It's a very easy lever. We know it's support skewed because support item has % more mana regen on it. It's really, really easy. You can do it to everybody. Cool, that's an easy one. The next one, though, is generally speaking, PvP power up, PvE power down. So better, more reliable tools for dealing with enemy champions. Weaker wave clear somewhat. Sure, right? This is the kind of thing where every version of Swain will use PvP power, but only mid lane Swain and bot lane Swain uses the PvE power, the pushing power. So that's an easy way to just kind of shift things around without really much to think about, right? It's just very, very simple power shifts, things you do in, 40 minutes or whatever, and you probably be okay. Yeah, those are there because they're really free and it's not a really big problem. Next thing is another one that's really, really easy, which is just simply closing the gap on W max and E max. So zooming out a little bit here, one difficulty with Swain is that he basically only has about 1.5 spells. His W is extremely, extremely unreliable, but eats up a lot of his power budget. And his E is also extremely unreliable and doesn't really work in his favor, but is one of his 4 active skills, and so he's really left with, I have a Q and an R, and that doesn't make for a very satisfying champion. Now, there was not make a new spell, get new particles for all of his skins, get new animations, get new sound effects. That wasn't scoped out for this project. If I had a killer new W and I was like, yo, get me an animator, get me a VFX, get me some stuff, we'll ship it in 15.1 or something, yeah, we could have found that, right? Like, if the project is good enough, we'll get the resources and we'll make trade-offs somewhere else in League of Legends. Something else will get pushed back or whatever, or delayed or reprioritized or something. I didn't think about making a new spell. I thought I could do a decent job with this without making a new spell, though probably the best version of Swain replaces W. My opinion, the best version of Swain is that he embraces being a battle mage. He embraces being a relatively short-ranged range champion, and he's really good in that range. You can outrange him. You can beat him with poke in the way that, like, Xerath beats Azir and that kind of stuff. Like, sure, right? But he's going to be tanky, battle mage, short range, useful, but also more reliable. Not only in his individual spells are more reliable, but also he has fewer sharply horrible matchups. So that Swain can be a more reliable champion. Anyway, one thing about this is that W is not a battle mage spell. Now, some Swain players love the global map tactician thing, and so this is not trying to kill W max and making it strictly worse than E, but it's bringing the gap closer because ranks in E are useless. There's no cooldown scaling. The damage scaling is fine, but W gives you cooldown and range and damage and CC, and like there's literally 6 level-ups on Swain W, and I think there's 2 or 1 on Swain E. And technically there's 2 because there's E1 and E2 damage, and that's silly. So again, for a lot of this, it's kind of simple number changes, but it's making Emax or Wmax a bit closer so that he can play QE Swain and be more of a battle mage, using the tools that are more in the sort of short to mid-range play style here. And so it's moving some power around to let that be a reality. One thing that's worth noting is that support Swain, a decent portion of support Swain players actually max E second, and a couple of them max E first, because it might have made sense that you could like realize why you would max the root in the way that Morgana maxes her root. And so there's a little bit of winner you can claw back there as well by making that skill order not a complete trap. Again, kind of minor stuff here. Swain is the kind of character where I think you can defensively argue for W second and E second, and when that's true, I would like it to not be a trap. There's some where it's like, of course I wouldn't max W first on Poppy. And see, we don't make that a thing. That's totally okay. You don't max shield force Mordekaiser. No one thinks that. It's fine. Singed skill order, very obvious. We're not going to change that. That's totally reasonable. But when they make sense to be debatable, I think it is useful for pretty little amounts of effort to bring those closer together. And so what's happening here? The really big thing, though, and of course here's the battle mage shaping earlier, whatever. The really big thing, though, is reliability increased. This is both his Q and his E are much more, I would say, reliable as tools. We'll talk about them in individual sections, but this has been, I would say, arguably the biggest tactic bucket here in terms of making the experience of playing Swain better. I'm pretty happy with what we have here. Fingers crossed, but I think it's pretty good. And sort of the final thing that is pretty reasonable is the base kit is going to be a larger portion of Swain's total power budget, and the ultimate is going to be a smaller portion of Swain's total power budget, although there's some shifts here that I think actually make him more fun and more interesting during the ultimate, and being less of a just Riley's Leandry's applicator. So let's break them down, sort of ability by ability. What are we doing to Swain? So there's E. E's damage is now being moved only to the explosion. So this was trailing into PvE down, PvP up, but also reliability up. So the explosion, if you don't know how Swain E is scripted, right, the hand comes out, and on live that deals damage, and actually deals about 2/3 of the damage of the ability on the way out, and then at the end, if there's an enemy in the circle, it explodes and deals the AoE root. If there's an enemy inside the circle, it explodes and deals the AoE root. And that root is like 1/3 of the damage. It's very, very, very low. Now, what's interesting is in many PvP interactions, only the explosion deals damage, because the explosion radius is larger than the E1 hitbox radius. So it's actually very, very likely that even if the champion is what's triggering the explosion here, you're only hitting them with E2. Whereas minions don't move, and so it's very, very easy to always hit minions with E1 and E2. So you deal full damage to caster minions, you do 2/3 of the damage to melee minions, and you often deal 1/3 of the damage to champions. By moving it into the explosion, we can make the impact feel a lot better, deal a lot more damage, and then you'll always get max damage all the time. Now, it's only ever going to hit 3 minions. Okay, fine, right? Again, PBE interactions are down. Yep. You're never going to hit melees for more damage. Okay. But you're going to have a much more reliable tool for dealing meaningful damage to champions. It's going to be dealing, again, like 3 to 4 times the damage in champion interactions in a lot of your E-casts. Next thing is the E1 missile, and as I said, when the E1 missile ends, it explodes, or will try to explode if someone's in the radius. This missile is faster. It feels way more reliable. From local testing, so the way that Swain E1 works on live right now is the missile acceleration is handled in scripting, and that ends up being a little bit error prone, which means that your E1 will reach max duration a couple frames early, a couple frames late, based on just random who knows what. But even in single player, where it's my machine running the server and I'm just, hitting Antibot here, it's still variant, and it's likely more variant on live. I don't know. I can't put debug printouts onto a live server and then get them. Not doing that. But in single player testing, it's very clearly not reliable. And so the nice thing is, as a Swain player, you have more agency. Your E will always explode in 0.6 seconds instead of up to plus or minus an extra tenth of a second. 0.5 to 0.7 was theoretically possible, though the tenth of a second off was really, really, really rare. You were often off by 1-2 frames, though. And so it's not faster in the average case, but it's much, much, much more reliable. And just visually, the missile looks faster because of changing the acceleration to be done in engine and picking a different starting and stopping value. And it just looks faster, even though the actual hit rate is the same mean as before. E2, however, is much faster. The total round trip time is being decreased by like 15 to 20%. So like E1 will explode the same amount of time, but going back to you, if like Yasuo or Yone is in your face, that's 15 to 20% faster. Yeah, you're not getting the E1 damage on the way out. You have to wait till it comes back. But the missile speed is so much faster. It is like very clearly, reliably better. 2 more things. The E2 missile starts much faster in the acceleration, which means that these like, if you're like here and I'm throwing E past you, this trip back is much, 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 much faster. And so that's a really, really big deal, because if you're like 700 range away and I've got to wait for E to come back, that's a significant increase in my reliability of hitting you. Also, the E2 hitbox has been widened a little bit. It is as wide as is reasonable for that missile. We can't go any larger without growing the VFX. I don't think growing the VFX is reasonable here. And so there's like 10 or 20 or something extra radius on the E2 missile, plus the missile speed. Like, yeah, technically, if you literally always got the median hit timing and you always got the E1 explosion and you always hit E1 with an explosion, which is really fraudulent, it's technically the same spell. That's fraudulent. In every other interaction, or almost every interaction, the spell is literally just stronger. More damage, technically not a better cooldown, but our playtesting estimates are that this spell hits 60% more often than before. So Swain E is actually 60% more spell, and the cooldown is nerfed much less than 60%. So E is, as far as we can tell, strictly buffed, essentially, in PvP interactions. It's at least win rate positive. And this, I think, is the set of changes that carries the most weight in terms of making Swain feel better. Next is Swain R. Biggest thing, multiple Demon Flares. Your first Demon Flare is still 2 seconds, but every 10 seconds affected by ability haste, you get another Demon Flare. So if you can keep your ult for like 10 seconds, this is like assuming you're getting like a Blackfire Torch or something, right? So 2 seconds, then plus another 7.5 to 8, you will get a second Demon Flare, which means your ult has a repeated crowd control profile, bringing a little bit less need onto the like Riley's and whatnot. You are probably still going to do a lot of Riley's Leandry's builds, but by increasing the haste appetite, not only for the ult cooldown itself, ult cooldown now starts when you cast it, not when it ends. But the Demon Flare Recycle is also scaling with ability haste. And yes, that'll scale with ulti haste as well. So Malignants will give you more Demon Flares. If you want to go do Malignants, Cosmic Drive, High Haste, Demon Flare spam, Swain, you can do that. That is there for you, right? That is a build. You can go get 80 ulti haste and spam that crap. Obviously, he already runs Ulti Hunter. It's literally even better for him now because it scales the Demon Flare refresh and it gets his ulti back. Via ulti haste actually working the second you press R, which means if you somehow get a 30-second long ulti, that cooldown's gonna be real short when you come out of it. That's obviously really, really rare, but the high point is there. Now, I know a lot of Swain players are like, man, I really hate how much my power budget is tied up in R. Here's the thing, this is not the average case R, right? The average case R is still 5 seconds long, 1 Demon Flare, and those are weaker. That power has gone into your base kit, into your Q being better, into your E being better, and your W being a better 1-point wonder. That max, about the same spell. The average Swain R is actually weaker. The high roll Swain Rs feel a lot better. It is possible to get 3 Demon Flares in a team fight. It feels great to get 3 Demon Flares in a team fight. It really does. It has been a pretty positive playtest point. And so once we got it in, we kept it. We're like, yep, this definitely works. Let's find the numbers that work. Yep, we're good. Okay. That said, of course, power has moved around. The baseline DPS and heal per second on R is lower because you're getting multiple Demon Flares. The calculations for where this comes from is significantly AP ratio down to pay for AP ratios elsewhere, primarily in Q and E. There is now a bonus HP ratio in the R healing. This allows him to play a more defensive, more battle-made style build with something like a Spirit Visage. There's actually special casing for Spirit Visage in his R to play the heal per tick if he has it, and the ticks were too low otherwise. It's a really minor thing, but it exists technically. And that's still there. It's been kept. That's been in the scripting for years. But it's like, it was there. It was an item that people thought he would run at some point. But overall, the R has, on average, worse scaling with ability rank. Specifically, cooldown is flat at 120 because you can hasten it through game time with simply getting ability haste. You don't have to use ability ranks to do that anymore. But because, again, your 10-second duration ulti or whatever is ticking in the background as cooldown, this ends up working out reasonably well. And the fact that your ulti has, like, an actual cooldown, it's not like 60 seconds or whatever late game, means we can, again, have the power budget to put that power elsewhere on the kit and not tie you so strongly to R. So again, numbers changes. The slow is a bit higher on Demon Flare as well. Again, multiple casts and whatnot. The point being, essentially, with this kind of stuff is, though we still expect Riley's, Liandry's, Zhonya's to be a fairly common build and using like only runes to get ulti haste, the ability to play a high haste Cosmic Drive style build, the ability to play kind of high AP and rely more on base kit and using like QEW combos, those are getting opened up a little bit via the fact that these scaling getting moved around. We'll see if there really are multiple viable builds, but a lot more itemization options have been opened up through changes like this. All right, we then move on to pretty much the rest of the small stuff here because we're mostly done with the big stuff. As mentioned, shifting from base mana to mana regen is a just simple support skew thing. With E being so much more reliable, it was being landed, again, 50 to 60% more often in early lane. He was essentially having a really strong spell that had strong damage onto it, that was hitting really reliably, that was giving him 14 max health and healing for a ton, and the health delta on his landing of Swain E was like 120 for a rank 1 spell. That was honestly really hard to dodge, and so the total throughput of that spell felt too high, and so we chose to nerf passive per shard heal. We kept the max HP. He's going to get more max HP because he's going to land more E's. He's going to deal more damage, he's going to land more E's and combo that into Q and W. That's all still there. But because of how health positive those trades were, had to do a compensation nerf onto passive healing. Base mana cost on Q is lower, so this is sort of wave clear satisfaction for mid Swain. He can just spam more Qs overall. This roughly compensates the base mana change a little bit. Like, this ends up being relatively power neutral, to be clear, on mid Swain. It's power positive on support Swain in the average case. So Q is just kind of free real estate. It's just cheaper. Congratulations, your primary wave clear is more spammable. Enjoy, you're going to be kind of feeling better. Q damage has been reshaped. The maximum shotgun damage on Q is 200%. On live, that scales with rank, essentially. Like, the per finger damage is distinct from the, like, hit one damage. And so the shotgun ratio went from like 1.6 to 2.4x, like somewhere around there. Same thing with the AP ratio, it was like a little funky. This is basically Q has a better ratio on average. It has more minimum damage, aka Swain into ranged champions is a bit nicer, doing about 10% more damage, and Swain into pure melee champions is a bit worse, doing about 10% less damage. The reason for this is simply to be like, hey, Swain can kind of only use his Q well. It's like, Swain into Syndra, well, I can Q you for 140 damage. You can QE me for 300. I can never do anything because I can't land E and I can't land W. This says, okay, well, if I'm going to Q back at you, it's again like 10-15% stronger. It's much better at this like mid-range we're trading back and forth pattern. I can at least get some chip damage on you. And just trying to make sure that like the breadth of his matchups, he's got more completely not trash matchups. But at the end of the day, Swain on live can kind of only beat melee champions. Like, you pick Swain support and Swain bot lane when you see Nautilus and you're like, I can't lose the game, I'm anti-melee. And they play an enchanter and you're like, I don't exist. And so softening that a little bit allows him to have a better matchup spread and not be quite as sharp. I think this is generally like slightly positive for League overall, but in this case, positive for Swain. W is just compressed. Essentially, the slow duration is slightly lower. The slow potency is up, especially ranks 1 through 4. And just like a couple of things, like the reveal duration's been flattened to be like same at all ranks, because who's ranking this for reveal duration? But essentially it means that there's slightly weaker rank up incentives on W, and there are new rank up incentives on E. Cooldown scales with rank, damage scales about the same with rank, but because it's more reliable, getting more E's is a pretty big deal. And again, generally speaking, higher ratios, especially on E, on Q, siphoned away from R for the most part. And that is kind of the overview of changes to Swain. There's some minor things not mentioned here. It's not really worth talking about, but it's basically more reliable E, multiple Demon Flare on R. Q is more reliable long range. W is better at ranks 1 through 3, basically, and bringing a lot of things closer together. So this has tested pretty positively. We are happy to ship it. If the tuning is wrong, we will, of course, retune as needed, but hopefully a positive experience for Swain players, mid, and support. All right, we're also doing a systemic update to our bounty systems. We're changing both champion bounties and objective bounties in the same patch. Makes sense to do them both together. On the sort of overall game health level, we actually want there to be both less snowballing and more stringent comebacks, aka less snowballing and fewer comebacks. In general, player sentiment is that the game is a little bit too snowbally, so we're hoping to err on the snowballing a little bit more. Keep in mind that by nerfing the value of gold by 8% or so a couple patches ago, that also lowered snowballing some. We could still go further. I think we can lower snowballing more in League of Legends. But generally speaking, the result is meant to be a little bit less snowballing, but also if you are sort of the player doing well, there's two sides of it, right? Like, obviously, if there are lower bounties in the game, comebacks are harder. But also, if you're the one player who's carrying on a team that's kind of feeding, that will also loom over your head less, and that'll be a fairly big deal here. As far as like player-facing goals, or like another sort of set of goals to talk about this is that it doesn't really matter how bounties are, like how complex bounties are under the hood, because we're not going to tell you how complex they are under the hood anyway. It's just not really something you're meant to optimize. They are meant to feel intuitive in the sense that, like, when they show up, it makes it they showed up. Like, there are bounties. Yep, it makes sense. I understand, like, there should be bounty here. The fact that this champion has a bounty makes sense to me. You don't have to be like, but if I do the math, actually, it's like, no, that's not the point here. Because technically, even on live, bounties work according to the math. The scripting is reasonably good here. But there are cases where bounties show up and players are like, this bounty doesn't feel appropriate. This shouldn't be here. The rules are wrong. And so the sort of primary change here is to change the rules. They are somewhat complex in some cases. I won't dive into all of them because it's not worth it. But when they show up, they should make sense that, yep, this seems like the kind of state a champion should have a bounty for. All right, let's go. So up first, champion bounties. So we have completely rebuilt the champion bounty system. There are plenty of rules I kept from the old system and several that I essentially rewrote. To be clear, though, a engineer implemented this. It is written into code. There are a bunch of fiddly bits that we can tweak as designers. One thing that actually is cool is that this is going to be a unified bounty system across game modes. So, for example, ARAM uses technically and still will for 2 weeks, the old, like an old live bounty system where it's actually handled with like the normal fiddly knobs that are like easy to manipulate. Summoner's Rift right now actually has a new-ish bounty system that has a bunch of recreated rules in script, which has resulted in some of these edge cases that players aren't very happy about. And so now we can again set the rules differently on SR versus Howling Abyss. That's not hard. You just literally like on this map use these rules instead, and it's fine. But it's like, you know, pulling this knob, tweaking this lever, whatever. Anyway, let's talk about how champion bounties work on live Summoner's Rift and how they're going to work in the new system. So on live, everything is streak based. So kill streaks and death streaks are pretty much the only things, well, one of the only things that can give you a positive or a negative bounty state. If you get one kill or you die, it fully resets your bounty. Asterisk, if you have a really, really high bounty on your head, one death won't fully reset you. It'll still have some lingering bounty left over. But generally speaking, if you're 0 and 15, you get one kill, 300 gold. If you're 0 and 15 and you go 2 and 0, you have a bounty on your head. I think it's kind of silly. Another thing that I think is kind of silly is one assist always subtracts one death. So if you are, 0 and 10 and you show up and you give a locket shield and you gain 5 assists in a team fight, you're kind of like you're 0 and 5 already. Now you're already like well below like minimum gold value at that point anyway, but the point still stands that you can give away, 2,000 gold from dying and earn 200 gold from assists and almost fully offset that and be worth baseline again. Which I think that was kind of unfair. I think that streakiness could be pretty unfair. Again, you could be literally 2 and 12 and have a bounty on your head because you were 2 kills in a row. There are other like really minor bugs, such as the shut down notification that like the announcer displays was actually only based on kill streak. So if you were 60 and 0 and died, it would say shut down. And then you'd be 0 and 1. And so though you'd have a bounty on your head still because you'd have leftover bounties from kills, the announcer would not say shut down because shut down was based on having a kill streak. Minor stuff here, but like, weird bugs we find when we dig into that, right? The other thing that has been ripped out is there is a rule for CS bounties, which was comparative farm, right? So if I'm a 000 200 CS Jinx, I can have a bounty on my head when my lane opponent is a 100 230 CS Ashe. Because if Ashe's top laner and jungler aren't farming well, then I as Jinx can be out farming the average of the enemy team and have a bounty on my head because I'm CSing better than the average of the enemy team. This Ashe was 1-0, and 1-0 is not a streak, so it could never build a bounty on itself. If my top lane jungler farming well, then Ashe, who objectively is more powerful than I am, doesn't have a bounty on her head because she's not farming worse than my top laner, and 1-0 doesn't do anything. Obviously, kind of silly, and players rightly would be like, wait, this doesn't make sense to me. Even though the rules are technically being enforced fairly, very reasonable for players to be like, hey, I don't like this, and I agree. And so the new system is unified. It is all based on gold, not really full stop, but kind of full stop here. It's based on gold ellipsis. So kills, obviously, give you gold. Deaths give gold to the enemy team. Assists give you gold. Or if you got killed by 2 people, give gold to the enemy team. And farm gives you gold. And based on an amalgamation of these factors, you will have a positive or negative bounty on your head. So one baseline rule is that gold earned and gold given away by PvP are always treated equally. So if I earn, let's say I give away 600 gold from dying, and I then earn 600 gold from kills, I'm back to normal. If I earn 600 gold from kills, and I lose 600 gold from dying, asterisk here, we're back to average. The reason I say sometimes is, again, assists matter here, right? So if I get solo killed, I give away 300 gold, and so I go in the whole 300. If I get duo killed, I gave away 450, one to the top laner and one to the jungler who ganked me. I am down 450 in the hole. These are treated separately because I gave away literally 50% more money. If I get killed by 5 people, it's still 450, it's fine, but the math says, right, if technically this means though that if I am 3, 3, and 0, I'm probably in the hole because I earned 900 for my 3 kills, but I gave away 1350 from 3 deaths with assists attached to them. And so that is a thing where it's like, hey, players, I'm trusting you to understand that a kill does not always equal 1 death because assist gold counts. Assist gold counts for deaths, and assist gold counts for kills. If I'm 0, 0, and 15, I'm not as good as being 15, 0, and 0, almost certainly, but I am probably going to have a bounty on my head because I've probably earned 1,000 or so gold from assists. 1,000 gold is like being 3 and 0 or almost 4 and 0. that's going to have a small bounty on my head. It'll be like 130 or something, but I will have a bounty on my head. Again, counts for money coming in, counts for money coming out. And these are transformed in the same way that, you know, the rate at which I accrue a bounty will also slide back down at the same route, and the rate at which I go into negatives and I go under 300 gold will slide back up at the same rate as well. So you can never get into a state where, I mean, again, unless you're killing champions who are worth a lot or a little gold, right? Like if I am killing a 0 and 6 Jax who's worth 100 gold, that kill is only giving me 100 gold. It's not giving me a kill streak of 7, aka 600 bounty in my head. It's going to be like, oh, this kill earned you 100 gold. We're only going to accrue your bounty as though you earned 100 gold from kills. Basically as though you got an assist on a regular champion, essentially. And so again, it's based on gold. And so the quality of your kills changes things. There's a couple things that matter here, right? It means, this might have been obvious, but we'll restate it, that if you solo kill your opponent, your bounty goes up more slowly. It also means that their value goes down more slowly because they only donated 300. This means the like solo inting Scion is not going to generate bounties on the target as hard, but also solo inting Scion is going to essentially fall down more slowly than if he was getting multiple ganked, right? And if he's getting killed by 2 people, 3 people, whatever, that rate is faster sort of across the team on one side, but for him on the other. I think it covers that reasonably well. I don't think there's other details to really bring out. I guess the other things I'll bring up here are that if you pay out an actual champion bounty, that gets paid out, and that gets sort of deleted from your bounty. Let's say you had to earn like 3,000 kill gold. That's not the right number, but let's just say it was. If you had to earn 3,000 kill gold to get a 700 gold bounty, and you die, obviously you're only giving away like 450 for the kill and assist and 700 for the bounty. That's only 1,100 gold. You paid away the bounty, that resets you down to 0 bounty, and then you pay down your 450. So you don't like have a 700 bounty, then die, then have a 400 bounty, then die, then have a 100 bounty, then die, then not have a bounty, and then keep going. It's like if you paid out 700, we've deleted that 700, and you start acting like a normal champion again. Now, again, in the old form, you pay out 700 bounty, you go 0-2, you're instantly worth, you know, less than 300 gold. In this case, you probably won't be less than 300 because you are like paying down to the top end of 0 bounty, and then you're paying down the surplus and moving from there. That maybe made it more confusing than not. Regardless, again, it's based on gold, and if you start paying out actual bounties, like positive bounties on your head from kills and assists, that does not get, that gets like appropriately taxed as like, you get to delete the bounty, you paid it out, the comeback mechanism was used. So what this means essentially, the ideal tuning here to like bring up another point is that chain ganking the same person is going to be worse because the overall tuning is meaningfully different. Putting somebody in the dirt will send them to 100 gold value much, much, much more quickly, especially because assisted kills bring them down 1.5x as fast. Like if you're killing your lane opponent, cool. They're going to be worth a bag of gold for a decent amount of time here. But if your Nocturne top keeps ganking that top lane, that's going to be a 100 gold kill really, really quickly. And it's just not worth going there anymore, so leave him alone and go kill bot lane instead. The tuning pretty aggressively says go gank different lanes. That is generally speaking how it's going to work. Now, the second thing, which is talking about farm bounties. So farming bounties are still in the game. They're just architected in a very, very different way. So instead of comparing your farm to the average farm of the enemy team, which honestly, yeah, though it was applied fairly, did not read fair to players, farm is just simply gold in, bounty out. Now, it's the scalar on that is not the same as kills and deaths. 300 gold from kills is not the same as getting 15 CS. Right? 1 kill is not 15 CS. 1 kill is more like, I don't remember actually. It's going to be more like 30 CS, honestly. Or 40 or something. I don't remember the exact numbers. It doesn't really matter. I could look them up. I know what they are. They have resulted in reasonable numbers here, but hey, by the way, farm is scaled differently, and it's scaled differently in positive and negative. So if you are feeding really, really hard, right? You're 0 and 5 on Aurelia or whatever. Farm on live it currently does this. It currently walks you back towards being worth 300 gold. On live, 1 kill fully resets you. On live, 1 assist undid 1 death. In this case, of course, 1 kill will not fully reset you, and 1 assist will absolutely not undo 1 death. Unless you were giving away 100 gold in solo kills and you got an assist on someone full value, then I guess it would, but whatever. Farm is thus more aggressive at pulling you out of the negatives. Which, by the way, what this means is that supports are going to be constantly worth very low amounts of gold because they're not farming and their assists are low value. Supports will not be very big bags of gold in a mature game state where they're like 0, 6, and 10. That is a low value champion at 0, 6, and 10, almost always. That'll be an interesting thing. We'll see how players feel about that, but that is going to be the case. But if you die, you get 5 waves, you die, you get 5 waves, you die, you get 5 waves. That comes a little bit closer to going neutral. Not fully, but it does mean that if you let somebody go and farm and catch back up, you can come back 8 minutes later or whatever, and that gains you more valuable. So because kills and assists do not reset as hard as before, farm resets harder than before. The other thing is farm can now just directly give you positive bounties. The rough tuning is 1 CS equals 1 bounty. You cannot pay out a bounty until you've actually accrued 100, and then even beyond there you have to actually now start counting. But it does mean that a 200 CS Ashe will just have a bounty on her head. 0, 0, 0, 200 CS will have a bounty. Full stop, unless they got only cash minions, which is an XD. That will be the case. That will be there. They will have one. And it does not matter if Renekton was farming well or not. They will just be 200 CS Ashe, which is a pretty good amount of gold, right? That's 4,000 or so gold from farm. They've got 1 legendary, maybe 2. They've got a small bounty on their head. It's going to be like a 100 gold bounty, but they will have a bounty on their head. Again, it's not literally based on CS, it's based on gold, but that is the case here. So that is the overview of the system. Gold in, gold out, minor asterisk, things like Pike ulti and TF passive and Draven passive do not count. It must be direct kill gold, direct assist gold, and direct farm gold, as well as the money given away by dying and to your assisters. If we need to tweak things, such as people really, really hate the fact that being 0, 0, and 10 gives them a bounty, and we need to devalue assist gold, fine. If people really, really hate that a 0, 6, and 10 Nautilus, who is given away 1,800 gold from kills and only earned 600 gold from assists, they really hate how he has low value, we have the way to make assists bring you up faster and make sort of not quite direct comparisons, but this will ship with none of those in place. We'll see how players feel with a mature sort of bounty state, but that is kind of the point here. Again, repeat ganking a player will be incredibly low value very, very quickly, but solo kills will not drop as quickly, and that is meant to be a pretty useful thing here. All right, on to the next piece. Objective bounties are getting tweaked. Now, this is mostly under the hood tuning. There's almost no new mechanics here, but let's talk about it very briefly. Gold is going to matter more in terms of determining who has an objective bounty or not. XP is going to matter substantially less. Much, 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 much less. XP will be much less valuable in determining who has a bounty. Which team, rather, has a bounty. Ultimately, XP leads and gold leads tend to move very closely together. They tend to be pretty closely tied, but the actual impact of gold is higher than the actual impact of experience, and so move the numbers around to make gold matter more and XP matter less. There is a weird quirk of implementation where turrets could often not matter at all. Now keep in mind, turrets themselves give gold, and that gold is counted as gold, but the fact that a turret is missing from the map means you have a positional advantage. You have, more spaces you can be. There's less vision for your opponents, and so turrets have some inherent value when they fall. They're going to matter a little bit more, based on mostly just some configuration tweaks, which will make them line up with actually contributing to bounties in more scenarios. Grubs were never added as a bounty contributor, and so grubs now matter. And so having 6 grubs will have a pretty meaningful impact in a team having a bounty or possibly not. I think this is a relatively sane tuning here, but the fact that grubs now matter, the fact that gold matters more, the fact that turrets matter more, the only thing that's going to make bounties matter less is the fact that XP matters less. Again, this is pretty aggressively tuned back, but it's worth noting that there are several instances of bounties turning on more aggressively from things that matter, turrets, grubs, and gold. This has tended to be pretty reasonable, but we can always, and honestly pretty easily, tweak when they turn on and be like, actually, it's a little bit too inflated. They should turn on a little bit later. That is not hard to change. It is a trivial 2 minutes worth of work to affect how quickly bounties turn on. But the tuning right now seems to be fine, but let us know, right? Give feedback, that's all fine. One thing I'm going to bring on real quick, before jumping over any further, is there's actually an interaction here with champion bounties and objective bounties. So we're using objective bounties as a fairly objective measurement of which team is winning the game. So if your team has objective bounties, all champ bounties on your team are depressed, and they're depressed by more the larger the objective bounty score is. I mentioned, right, not wanting the one good player on the team to get punished for, there being the only good player on the team. Well, they will actually have a depressed bounty if objective bounties themselves are on. Other tuning tweaks to objective bounties, they will overall turn off sooner. So if you get far behind, the objective bounties turn on. There's a mechanism by which they won't turn off right away, because like imagine you like get one CS and they turn on, they get one CS, it turns off, right? There's a mechanism that keeps that from happening. The mechanism is actually fairly forgiving and it's been tightened up. And so the turn back off tuning has been turned much more aggressively. And so they will start turning off much sooner as you claw back into the game more tightly. Also, they're going to give somewhat less gold. So Baron and Elder specifically are being devalued on objective bounties. The primary reason is if you have objective bounties and your team is losing, killing Baron by itself is worth 1,500 gold and 3,000 experience. And killing Elder Dragon is a very big boon as well. Those tend to already mark a pretty big turning point in the game. And so paying you an extra 500 gold or possibly more just because you got this big objective, to me, felt kind of wrong. Turret bounties are unchanged. Rift Herald bounties unchanged. Elemental Dragon bounties are unchanged, but Baron and Elder themselves were already so big, I thought they don't need a really, really big bounty on top of their heads as well. We can bring those down. The other thing is there's a new lever being added, which is the Linger gold. So basically, you've probably seen it, right? Where it's like objective bounties are falling off soon. You've got 1 minute until they're going to fall off entirely. And you can get like one more objective and you're out there, right? There's 2 levers being added. One, the linger is being shortened from 1 minute to 30 seconds. So if you win your team fight and it says bounties are turning off soon, you only have 30 seconds to go finish that turret or finish that Baron or whatever. And so in some cases, you don't get to pay off with an extra bounty here, because I think that's reasonable to say use it or lose it, get there fast, because if it's turning off, it's because the game is close again. So the bounties go away. The other is there's actually, I added some special tuning levers to say, hey, we're already in the falling off state. You can go claim your bounty and feel good about it, but we're going to devalue it below normal. So normally, right, you could have like a 1.0 bounty, and for a elemental drake that's 500 gold. You could have it be 20, 40, 60, I believe, or even 80% more gold based on how far behind you are. So that could be 6, 7, 8, 900 gold for a dragon. If you're really, 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 really far behind, by the way, almost impossible. You have to be behind in every metric by a ton for that to be the case, but it was theoretically possible. If you're coming back, it can now go down by 20 or 40%. So that dragon could be worth 400 or only 300 gold if it's like, no, you've really, really come back. We'll leave the bounty here because it feels good to claim this, but it's going to be less impactful overall. So this is basically just more, or it's partially a strict nerf to objective bounties, but also the fact that it's going to turn on from the mechanics that matter more. It will turn on in appropriate states more often and inappropriate states less often, but it will also provide a little bit less to the game overall in the states where it is on. On average, it'll provide less to the game overall when it is on. The big change is to champion bounty re-architecture. That's actually a relatively big deal here. That is overall the systems and champion changes in the patch. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye-bye.